Welcome, everybody, to the Metal Mastermind Show. I'm Ken Candelas, and I am joined by my co host.
I am Jason Stallworth. Welcome to Metal Mastermind, guys. Thanks for showing up.
Welcome, welcome. Awesome to see people here. This is going to be such a interesting show today. We kind of took it in a different direction to bring a little bit more spotlight on not just what recording for metal is like or being a musician in the metal community, but what are the philosophical aspects to being a metal musician as well. We figured that this was an important topic that would, see a lot of, opinions and stuff like that. So we wanted to kind of shed our own light and try to maybe explain from the metal community, right? This is kind of like the letter from the metal community to the world as to who are we and what do we believe in. Are we devil worshippers? Or are we good people that are trying to live our lives just like anybody else, right? And we hope that this conversation, because that's at the bottom of it, that's what this really is. This is a conversation, an ongoing conversation, I might add, on what does it mean to be a metal musician and what do our beliefs how do our beliefs reflect and contribute to the music that we create? Does religion have a place in metal music, Jason?
This could be a very scary topic. It's a topic that's caused wars over the years and
Oh
still
yeah.
causes, still causes strife today among different, religions and different communities and ethnicities and such. But the thing is, before we dive into this, guys, let me just make a disclaimer for the Metal Mastermind. We're not promoting any religion, and we're also not slamming any religion. So I want, and I think you guys on here that's with us has been with us for a while, and thank you, by the way. We appreciate all of you guys. I think that Ken and I well enough by now that to know we're just like you. We're just some cool people, but we wanted to talk about though this topic of religion and metal because I think there's some Ken and I were talking about this last week. I think there's some misconceptions there, and that you have to be a certain way or that you can't be a certain way. And it goes two ways there. And what I'll say to that before Ken and I kind of open it up and share our own experiences is, I like to see life from the third side of the coin, not heads or tails, but from that edge to where you can look down and really clearly see all sides and kind of appreciate that. But Liam says freaking Slayer. That's a religion. So, dude, Ken, do you want to start out by just kind of sharing some of your experience with religion and your background and then how that ties into metal music for you?
Sure. Well, I grew up in a Catholic home. I'm Puerto Rican, and you know, Latin community is typically very Catholic,
Yeah.
and or Christian, whichever you side of the coin, using that analogy that you are on. It's still the same coin, and
Indeed.
when we are growing up in my household, it was very much artsy. So there wasn't a lot of emphasis necessarily on traditionalism. So I grew up in a very open minded house, but we did have our core roots stemming from Catholicism. I went through my baptism, my um, what do they call it? I'm such a bad Catholic. When you get the Eucharist, a communion, the communion, and my confirmation. I went through all of those steps, and as I was going through that moment in my life, I was maybe about 11 years old, 12 years old when I was first introduced to Lamb of God, Disturbed, and Metallica, these sorts of bands. my brother was like really into that kind of stuff, and he was also really into. My mom was like such a big Halloween fanatic that my
Yeah.
brother also kind of adopted uh, that stuff and listened to metal music because of being influenced by werewolves and vampires and all that kind of stuff. So I think it was because of my mother that it really kind of stemmed into me loving metal, eventually kind of trickling down through my brother. So Halloween was a big thing for us. We even had we kind of took it in a sort of Christmassy type of vibe, if you can call it that. We used to celebrate the pumpkins kind of like as Santa Claus. Like the pumpkins during
Nice.
Halloween would give us gifts because we carved them and we brought them to life for the Halloween event. So as a reward, they were like, "Thanks for bringing us to life. Here are some goods and stuff like that, and presents and whatnot." So I was brought up in a sort of Christmas Halloween type of environment, and we took that to everything else in our lives. We loved horror, we loved movies, and Christianity kind of started to at a certain point kind of remove itself from the equation as far as being, constantly going to church. I used to go to church every Sunday, then that kind of stopped at a certain point, and I just started to focus more on being more humanistic and focusing on artistry and being a better person, not necessarily with ties to heaven or hell, but ties to,
EO.
yeah, ties to just really the world and kind of the cosmos in that sense. So I never, I struggled at some point with atheism and whether I was truly an atheism, and I considered myself more of an just an agnostic, which I think everybody really is an agnostic. Nobody knows for sure, but I digress. I just kind of went in that realm of trying to be curious, and my approach to everything in life was with that sort of lens. I say right now I've become more of a spiritualist rather than just like an atheistic. I feel more tied to my surroundings and my environment than I've ever had before, and I don't think that's necessarily because of one god or another. I think it's just becoming more in tune with who I am as myself, and maybe that's a little more of a like a Buddhist type of mentality, but um, I've adapted that into my art as well. But yeah, that was my transition from
Nice.
being, as a child, as a Catholic, growing through the steps, and then sort of coming out of the gates and seeing the world for the first time on my own research. And I was like, okay, I kind of like this route. Let me try this route. And then I kind of dived and dabbled and experimented with those forms of um, tapping into that higher being or higher self.
Yeah.
What about you, Jason?
That makes a lot of sense, man. I mean, my path, I guess, was somewhat similar, but I started out and I started out in a church that was Pentecostal holiness, and to some, that's like an extreme version of Christianity. Is kind of an extreme sect. We weren't handling snakes or anything like that, but there was the speaking in tongues and that sort of thing, and jumping up and down the aisles. It was kind of like a death metal concert if you
Yeah.
think about it. And all due respect, though, like I'm not, I haven't been to church in a long time, but in my latter years, I started going to what was called non-denominational style churches, and these were churches. I actually was in the beginning phases of starting two churches. I didn't start them, but I was there in the middle of that, as they were starting. So, it was one of those things where, I've always been a believer in God, but I've kind of like discarded many of the teachings that I grew up with, if that makes sense,
Hmm.
And back then, I was also listening to a lot of Christian metal. I was listening to Metallica and Slayer and all that stuff, but there was a lot of Christian metal. One band in particular, Mortification, which is a death metal Christian band, if you can imagine. Now, you can only imagine how much heat that I got from listening to them from the Christians, like, well, that their distortion. I remember me and my buddy, we played our guitars in church one time. We clicked the distortion. We had the metals on pedals. We clicked them, man, and we just started jamming. And like this lady, nice as can be, she came up to us like, "You boys, that sounded good, but next time put your guitars on regular." So yeah, we're like, we don't know what regular is, well, we
What
know
is
it's just metal, but
regular?
yeah.
That's a subjective thing, lady.
Uh, but I don't think that I ever really strayed from my personal foundation of beliefs, but what I've learned to do over the years is just have, instead of like saying, well, your religion's wrong or you're wrong for not believing and that sort of thing, because that's how we grew up, and instead of doing that, I'm really more in tune with other religions because, and this is something we'll talk about, religion and culture kind of tie together. So I think a lot of you that know me well know that, like my wife, for example, she was born in Thailand, so she's half Thai, and I become very much ingrained in the Buddhist religion. I know quite a bit about that, and I've studied religions over the years just to kind of get a better understanding. There's an old saying I heard a while back, and it said, if you're very passionate about one side, you should be able to argue for the other side, whether it's opposing side or another side. In other words, you should be educated enough to know that view that well that you could argue for that side. I could say the
Mm.
same about Democrats and Republicans, We won't get into that. It's I don't know if we'll ever have that conversation on here, but anyway. I mean, from a personal perspective, and I don't mind sharing this with you guys, I am very much, I'm very much, again, respectful of all religions, and I think we should be, and the thing about the metal was kind of perceived. I think we touched on this last week. Metal was kind of perceived as, well, that there's the devil's music. You guys know I grew up in the South, so I got to try
Yeah.
to do the accent, but it's perceived as the devil's music, and yeah, there's some imagery, and there's some bands that are blatantly satanic, we're going to talk about some of those as well, but that's kind of my experience. So, Ken, that's
Yeah, I think you make a
in a
great.
nutshell.
I think you make a great point. And Liam actually brought up something that I wanted to talk about with, which is like folk metal, but
Oh yeah,
not just
dude.
necessarily like folk metal, but like pagan music. Paganism was essentially anything that wasn't Catholicism during those
That's right.
times, and we can go all the way back to the medieval era, and you get Martin Luther and all of these figures in history that there was one sort of way to look at the world. Well, this is we're talking about in Western music, of course. And this was kind of the ideology that was predominantly implemented, and then once we started getting into like the eras like the Renaissance and the Baroque, these started to expand upon what we as humans appreciate and love and respect and pay homage to. So, during that medieval era, people were making art that wasn't tied to who they were. They was just like, oh, this was inspired by God, so this is God's work, right? So that's why
Yeah.
they made the things that they did. When we started getting to the Renaissance, we started to see people say, "Hey, I'm going to put my name on this piece of art, and people will know that it was because of me." Yeah, it's a little more egotistical that way, but it's also a good thing because then it started to spawn more of a sort of universal appreciation for the human part of the equation, right? It wasn't just we're not just messengers from the ethereal. We're also our own beings, and that's important to recognize. And I feel like that's
Yeah.
really a big part of the metal culture of being human, being that person. And in folk metal and many types of pagan metal, we're highlighting on that stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
even like you'll see influence into other types of genres from metal. If you've ever listened to something like Heilung, it's a very like Nordic type of German sort of folklore type of music, and it's very like ancient, like words and stuff being used, but almost like the attitude comes from this sort of like metalistic type of culture, which I love about it. If you ever go to one of their shows or if you see one of their shows, check it out. Heilung, Heilung. Very very interesting, super tribal type of vibe, but you'll immediately feel like, oh, I can get why metal heads like this type of stuff,
Yeah.
because it plays into not necessarily what the religion of, God or polytheistic stuff. It pays to the religion of all of us as one, which I really resonate with. And that's why I always say, like, I'm a spiritual type of person, because I do feel that we are so connected in that sense. And that's just one example. You get other, bands out there that are doing other types of, paganistic music. I mean, you have, things like Winter Sun, or you'll have, uh,
Winter Sun, yeah.
yeah, Winter Sun, really great band, or you'll have,
Good stuff.
um, you know, all these, different. Yeah, I'm even blanking out on a couple of these right now, but just so many different styles of metal that reflect on the subject of folklore, being, folk metal and also oral tradition. Folk music came passed down by oral tradition, so a lot of the stuff that we find in folk metal comes from things that are passed down from tradition, more culturally, I would say, in many ways, than just religion, but definitely involving religion in that folklore, just by the nature of passing down certain types of stories. We find that so in so many of these instances with these metal bands.
Yeah, that's interesting. And speaking of culture, a lot of metal is more culture than it is religion. But then, of course, culture is often influenced by religion. Like I said, I've got a recent Buddhist background here, so I listen to some Thai metal bands and rock bands as well. Which they've got some really cool, they've got some really interesting bands over there in Thailand. But many people in Thailand, many people are very ingrained in the Buddhist culture. And the funny thing about, or the Buddhist religion, the funny thing about that is they're not like pushing it in your face or anything like that. But then they do go to the temples, which beautiful temples over there, and they will pray to Buddha and that sort of thing, and they'll give tambun, which is Thai for giving good merit, that sort of thing. So
Mhm.
they'll do that, and in kind of America in the U.S. where Ken and I are, it used to be considered a Christian nation. I think a lot of people still consider that. If you look at the stats, probably more of people that will they'll check the Christianity checkbox. Doesn't necessarily mean that that's really what they do, but they feel comfortable with that. We're more of a melting pot, though, Ken. I think now, and that's the interesting thing about metal is a lot of it doesn't cater to any religion, you know what I mean? So when we
Right.
we asked in the beginning, does it have a place in metal music? I think that it does, though, because I think there are some blatantly anti anti God bands, maybe not even satanic. But Ken, you mentioned Ghost earlier. Talk to me more about Ghost. I don't know a lot about that band.
Well,
I've only
yeah. Also I want to say is that, I mean, the United States, we might be given the credit that we're kind of a Christian nation, but we're really actually a secular nation. Well, that's what we're
yeah, we'll say
supposed
that,
to
yeah.
be. Now
Well, yeah, by the Constitution, right?
we do
Yeah,
have a predominantly Christian, or Catholic, body of people in our
sure.
country, but really, yeah, it's supposed to be secular. But okay, going on to bands like Ghost. Okay, that's a perfect example of pagan music, right? Where
Yeah,
we're talking about literally worship of, not necessarily. Well, here's the thing. Hear me out for a second. Ghost gets the rep of being devil
right,
worshippers,
right.
but
Well, they got some imagery there, the upside down
yes, and
crosses
it's
and
and
all.
it's
Yeah,
definitely apparent with the imagery. But actually, what Ghost really represents is the human, spirit, and that separation from God. That's the highlight of what it is, and that's actually, believe it or not, what that Satanism, religion is really predominantly supposed to be about. When we're talking about devil worship, then we're actually believing in Satan as the devil. When we're talking about Satanism, it actually is using Satan as a figure of representation, as the rebellious figure against, Christianity. And we're actually highlighting more on that humanistic, part, which is what Ghost tries to emphasize by mocking the the Catholic Church, right? So that's
Right. Yeah.
where Ghost's identity sort of comes into play. And actually, the members of Ghost, they have admitted that they are atheists themselves. They
Yeah.
don't believe in the devil. They are using it as a theatrical appearance, right?
A lot of bands do that. I think a lot of bands do
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
It
The
wasn't Deicide considered the death metal band Deicide, weren't they considered satanic by in some right? And you had a couple more you were gonna name too, Ken,
Yeah, I
that
mean,
were
you
kind of like that.
have Belphegor is definitely that's
Yeah.
definitely satanic.
It's dark,
Belphegor
dude.
is like really, really, really dark music.
Yeah.
And I would argue that Belphegor probably has some hint of actual devil worship in there because they do
Yeah.
actually have some stories about them. And there are some other bands out there that do have backgrounds of doing bad things
Yeah.
that would be considered devil worship by many people. But that's not all of our bands, right? That is a very, very, very select,
Tiny
small
percentage.
percentage
Yeah.
of our community that may be believing in that kind of stuff. And metal was
Yeah.
maybe their only way of expressing that in music.
Yeah.
Now, I get why to use metal because metal is very hard and edgy, and there's a lot of
Dark.
dissonance in all of the
Yeah.
music, right? So, you listen to a band like Behemoth, you obviously hear that kind of dissonance apparent in that, and it's sort of in the image of representing, Asmodeus or all of these devils and demons, but uh, you know, n- uh, the players of Behemoth, they're not devil worshippers by any means. They're very much agnostics, and they stay away from identifying themselves as any one religion. They're more secular. They just use
Yeah.
it as that imagery to portray maybe what sort of human emotions and human trials and tribulations we go through with that sort of light on demonology, which makes it a very interesting subject for a lot of metal goers. Part of that edginess with the content that we're hearing is like, yeah, you're hearing
Yeah.
all about hell, and this is like very riling up our emotions to getting in the pit, doing all these sorts of letting go, letting loose. Everybody's in hell, so let's just be there together. And I've certainly been to a Behemoth show. I have gotten my ass kicked in a Behemoth show. I loved it.
Dude.
It's baptismal in fire, and it's great. They even light their incense to get the
Wow.
crowd kind of submerged in that environment.
Yeah.
It's a phenomenal experience. It's one of the best shows I've ever been to. Was a Behemoth show.
That's pretty cool. Wow.
And there are some amazing pieces of work that have been done. When we talked about Ghost, I really love their Meliora album. We're using sort of that concept that I've talked about of using Satan as just like an image of independence. And when Ghost is talking about submitting to Satan, it's not necessarily submitting to the devil, but submitting to being independent and being a free thinker and that sort of thing. That's one of the things I really liked about Ghost. I don't really like some of their later content, their new album type stuff. I kind of like Meliora and Infestissimum, I believe is what it was called. And their first album was really great. But then you have other bands. Okay, Behemoth, I love. What was that album that I was talking about? I'm trying to think. Although they're, I'll have to look at my iTunes to take a quick look. But Behemoth has really great stuff. I love Winter Sun's Time album. Time 1 is a great album for talking about sort of the culture of Nordic and drawing into the more humanistic part of the soul. I love that reflection when we're using Winter Sun. Tons of great albums out there. And even Nile. Nile is a very Egyptian oriented type of band. even though the players aren't Egyptian, but they're Carl Sanders actually identifies as an Egyptologist. I almost thought of this right when you talked about mortification. I was like, well, is there an Egypt band called Mummification?
Mummification.
You
Nice,
know,
dude. I love it.
and this really gets like a lot of cool content to talk about. We're talking about um, Anubis and all of the
Yeah.
Egyptian gods and incorporating that into that sort of music, even though they're secular too, right? The beliefs of the musicians don't necessarily reflect that of the music that's being played. The music can be played for theatrical and abstract purposes, right? Not necessarily because they are literal to who the people making the music are, what they believe in. And I feel like that's a really big distinction between metal musicians and a lot of other genres, is that we have this sort of separation from the spiritual world where we can think outside, we can detach from that sort of part of us, and we can look more objectively, look with that third eye in a lot of these things, which you said, Jason, looking at that other side of the coin, not just the front or the back, but the ridge that's right
That
in the middle.
tiny ridge.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the things about metal music too is, you know, I kind of and I used to have a bigger issue with bands that were like overly satanic and maybe bashing other religions because, if you look at today's culture just as a whole, the world is really trying to become more tolerant to certain things. We become into more tolerant with ethnicities and just one another, preferences and that sort of thing. So I guess I'd like to see more of that passed on to the religious part as well. I used to
Absolutely.
have a little issue, and I kind of still do sometimes when I hear a band bashing a particular religion because I know people of all religions and people that don't believe in anything at all, atheists or they're agnostic or whatever. And you're right. I think most people at the heart of it, we really don't know. So most people are
Right.
really agnostic, but it's like I've always kind of had an issue with that. It's like, okay, if we're trying to be more tolerant, you know what I mean, then why are we bashing? And some of the Christian metal bands way back in the day were kind of guilty of that as well. Though the band called Deliverance, I liked a lot of their stuff up to the point where they had a song about homosexuality and kind of
Mhm.
preaching against that in the lyrics. And I was like, I stopped listening to him after that because it was like, it's not something I want to support, and
Right.
it's not the view of all Christian people, believe it
Right.
or not. Biblically, there's not really anything biblically that actually spells out against that, but that's for another conversation. There's some deep theology behind that I studied on that, but so I guess, but then again, at the same time, there is a rebellious spirit to rock and roll and heavy metal, and
Sure.
like you said, it's about detaching and it's about this inner rebellion against really the norm of society. And the norm of American society has been, and Europe too, has been Christianity. So that's kind of part of that norm. And when we're like you said, we're more free thinkers, but I think you can be a free thinker and still be a religious person as well, though I truly believe that because
Sure.
like I was saying in the beginning, uh, you know, in my younger years, I was taught to believe a certain way. As I got older, I detached from a lot of that, but there's some that I kept, So I think you can still be a free thinker and be independent, but still have your core belief system, whether that be in God or Buddha or Allah or whatever. It's interesting. Most of you guys have seen this. I did a collaboration with the Arabian Panda last year, 2019, and he's from Dubai, so he's very ingrained in the Arabian culture, obviously, which I believe they're predominantly Muslim. So we got along just fine. He's like, man, yeah, I believe what I believe, but you know what? I drink beer and I eat steak, and I like heavy metal. So it was like, here I am. I believe in Allah and that sort of thing,
Yeah.
and that's fine. But maybe they're not to the extreme. So I do think some people think that if you're religious, then you're not a free thinker. And I know a lot of people that are religious that probably aren't free thinkers, but I don't necessarily think that disbands you from being a free thinker, if that makes sense. I
Absolutely.
think actually I think it's kind of the opposite. If you're saying people that say, "Well, I'm a free thinker, I'm not religious," well, then that means you're just not open to anything else but your little box. You know what I mean? So are you really a free thinker? And it's like, so I think free thinker, it's this, it's the willingness to be able to accept your own beliefs and be able to stand your own ground and not be moved, but also be accepting that other people have different beliefs and have different cultures. And I think that ties into the music, the metal music that we listen to, that comes out. And I think it's beautiful. Like somebody mentioned Sepultura, Liam. I think you mentioned Sepultura. Now of course that I don't think their music's based on any religion, but I was just thinking of the culture, which again, culture is often kind of influenced by religion. And I remember seeing Sepultura live. I could not get my eyes off the drummer. He was doing these tribal beats, and I'm like, "Holy crap!" I think they opened for Testament at that particular show, which was an amazing show.
Yeah, and
But so that's just my thoughts on that whole thing.
I think, and just to kind of backtrack, I wanted to say, yeah, I loved You at Your Darkest by Behemoth, great album,
Mm,
and
yeah,
Evangelion was a great album by Behemoth. Both, I love those two albums. But yeah, talking about Testament, man, was lucky enough when I was an intern at a studio here in New York City. I got to work with Alex Skolnick, and
Alex
he
is awesome, man. I
was
love him.
I've met him on more than one occasion, and Alex is he's one of the coolest dudes out there, man. He really is there for the music, and I really respect him. But one of the things that many people don't know about Alex, which I think is a really great thing about metal musicians in general, metal musicians tend to be a little more diverse with their taste in music in many ways. And Alex is no exception. And he actually did a side solo project called Planetary Coalition at that studio. The studio was called Spin Recording Studios in Long Island City, here in New York. And Alex came into the studio and he immersed himself with the culture that he was trying to record that day. So, in during that time, he got to record with Rodrigo and Gabriela. He got to record with Nitin Mita, who's an Indian percussionist, and other, people from around the globe. He had fly in and they did their part, or they were there in the city at the time. And basically, when, for example, one of his tracks on Planetary Coalition was a very Indian music heavy bass track where we had Neaton and we have another, I forgot her name escapes me at the moment, but she was a vocalist from India, and he got ready that day. He practiced what they practiced, mentally, to get into the same mindset. We ate Indian food that day and really
Indian
took
food.
it. Yeah, I love Indian food. And he really took it seriously and paid the respect that it deserved. They played for maybe 6 hours nonstop in that session. I think by the time everybody was like, when we stopped recording, everybody was just like, "Yeah, we earned having dinner right now." It was just like nonstop, and it was like you would get, Alex. He'd record his part. He record everybody recorded at the same time. By the way, it was organic. It wasn't like how you have overdubs and all this kind of stuff with modern day, recording. He wanted it to be as authentic, so everybody was feeding off each other, and he'd play along with everybody. Everybody would listen back, they'd feel it, and they'd say, "Let's do it again." In every take was amazing, like amazing. Like as an intern and who idolize, Testament and metal bands, and seeing Alex Skolnick do something like this, I was blown away. I was like, wow, like, man, I want to do something like that. I would argue that Alex Skolnick was actually one of the biggest inspirations for me to do my own project, Homeric, which was very much in that same sort of way, how I approached doing the music. If you listen to that first album, it's very much taking a bunch of different authentic styles, writing music in that sense, and then doing the metal to that. So I kind of adapted from Alex, that method in that sense. But yeah, what an amazing experience that I had with Alex Skolnick. Really nice guy, really in tune with, uh, in tune with music of different cultures, and paid respect to their religions and their etiquette. Uh, you know,
That's a huge key. What you just mentioned, dude, is paying respect, to the culture. And because if you think about the Indian culture, they're extreme. There's certain cultures that are really tied to their religion, and I don't know that that will ever change. And I don't know that it should change. Like the Indian culture is they're predominantly Hindi. Now they're different. I don't know how much you guys know about India, but India is basically 26 different dialects of language. So kind of like California,
crazy.
Mississippi, and New York, different dialects, right? But
Right.
no, they have different sects of the religion. There's different sects of Buddhism as well. And some of you may know this that Buddhism actually spawned from the Hindi religion. Buddhism was kind of a way of free thinking, so to speak, from the Hindi religion because the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, he did not believe in the Hindi religion. He kind of went out of his palace, and to experience something else. He was longing for something deeper, and this is when Buddhism was discovered. He's the original Buddha. But I guess my point though, the style, the Indian style of music, which very, very heavily influenced by the Hindi religion, right?
Mhm.
So without that religion, I don't think you would have that style. Could be wrong. You may have something else. Who knows? Without the Buddhist religion, some of the Thai metal bands that I listen to and rock bands I listen to, which are phenomenal, they may not have that embedded style, uh, and I think it's an important part, and whether you're religious or not. So we're talking about the Nordic bands, the pagan bands. Without that, it's not a religion, but without that, you wouldn't have those styles. So, it kind of like all circles back around to, tolerating different beliefs. You don't
Mm.
have to believe something that someone else does, but it doesn't necessarily mean you should bash them for it. You know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of that going on right now, really in all religions. I remember when Ken, you remember when 9/11 happened? You were in the heart of that stuff, dude.
Yeah.
And you remember all the hatred towards really just anybody that was brown, so to speak. You know what I mean? It was, and yeah, I had Indian friends, people I knew that were Indian. They're not even from the region where the attack came from, not even close, because India is
Yeah.
technically Asia, right? But there were hate crimes against anyone even remotely looked like that. And then recently we had the thing that we can't talk about that came from China, and so there's like hate crimes against Asians. You know what I mean? So we have a lot of that crap going on. So it kind of brings me back to, even if you don't agree with something, and if you want to look, if you're a satanic band and you're bashing Christianity, for example, if that's your genre, fine, so be it. But don't be the idiot that goes out there and like physically harasses people just because they don't think like you do, or they don't believe like you do, or they don't not believe like you do. You know what I mean? So I think that's where metal, I think, has matured a lot over the years. Ken, you and I were talking about Alyssa White Glutes from Arch Enemy, their
Yeah.
latest album, Will to Power. She's got a song called Believe or something to that effect, and there's a reason to believe. And I don't think she's talking about believing God, but I think she's probably believing in yourself. But very empowering lyrics. Kill Switch Engage, the same thing. Very empowering lyrics. So I think we've come around, quite a bit over the years.
Yeah, we're tapping into that humanistic side of artistry and being an individual in this world. It's not so much of, again, like maybe back in the, in the 50s and before then, there was a lot more of that religious predominance happening here in the, for example, in the United States. So a lot of the culture that was around the time really, you know, anything that was not familiar, it was blasphemy in that sense. And
Right. Yeah.
creating metal with distorted guitars and these hard bashing drums, that was not what was considered music. You can consider, like, take modern day mumble rap, you know where people are like, why are we back in the days of Biggie and Tupac, because that's real rap. And it's like, well, look, okay, I'm not a fan of mumble rap, but it is a
I
style.
don't even know what it is, dude. Am I that old?
it's
I've never even heard of
it
that
is
before.
it is a style, right? That's
Okay.
emerged, and I just want to just kind of use that as almost sort of like as a comparison of the times.
Yeah.
And when metal started, it was like the mumble rap of that era. Obviously, it wasn't mumble rap, but it was something different that nobody ever heard before, or
True.
they didn't respect or give it the respect that they thought it deserved. Everybody was familiar with jazz and, you know, clean rock and roll, right? You know, we're talking like Elvis Presley rock and roll or the Beatles. These were the types of bands and music that people were listening to at the time. So when they heard Black Sabbath was crazy, like far field from whatever they were used to. And it took people who thought outside of the box to say, no, yeah, that's music. That is music, and I love that, and I'm going to support that. And it started a trend that became an entire community and industry for
Yeah.
people to, you know, you can thank Black Sabbath for
I
creating
was about to say.
essentially what we have today.
Yeah.
You know, pay respects to Ozzy Osbourne. Yeah, he maybe was too fucking fucked up for the most of his life, but like he was a
Pissing in
pioneer.
public, you know, no.
You know, he
Yeah.
was a pioneer, and I love him for that. He was brave to do that. Rob Halford and everybody in Priest
Oh, I
and
love Rob
Sabbath,
Halford, dude.
and
Absolutely
and
love him.
Maiden. Like, you gotta give
Yeah,
them credit where credit is due, man. These
you have to.
people really pushed that community forward, and that's why they're the legends. They're the pioneers of this sort of community, and they have established the whole premise of what metal was about. And metal was, yeah, it was that rebellious spirit, and it wasn't tied to one religion. It was a secular form of art where you could incorporate a religion, and some people definitely have, and they've spread their message of what they believe
Sure.
in through it. But at its core, at its base, metal is not just one religion. It is all
Yeah.
religions, it's everything included, and it's also none of them at all in many ways, too. So,
That's true, because a lot of metal talks about different things, you know, like Dio, he was all about, you know, dragons and stuff like that, and bands like Iced Earth and Blind Guardian, some really cool stuff there, you know what I mean? It's more like fantasy type stuff, which fantasy at one time was really anti-Christian as well. I remember, you know, people shoving books in our faces telling us
yeah.
why all these bands and movies were bad, and Journey was on there. I'm like, "Okay, something's wrong if you're telling me Journey's satanic because that's just stupid," you know?
Yeah, well,
But there was a natural rebellion to that, you know, to against that, to, you know, become something different. And I think this just shows us the evolution of humanity being able to accept new ideas. You know, because it's kind of, you look back through time where people used to burn witches and stuff like that, you know, and how people were treated and tortured and sort of thing just because they had a different belief. So I think we've come a long way. We still have a ways to go. Yeah, I mean, I think that's always going to be the case. But you know, bands like, you know, think about Black Sabbath. I mean, the name itself was just rebelling. Black Sabbath. I mean,
yeah.
really. So
I mean, you definitely
yeah,
have a political, you know, stance with, you know, taking something like metal during that time, because that was what it was against. It was against that status quo of what we knew as normal, and it challenged that belief. So
yeah,
back then, yes, metal was definitely much more political. I think nowadays, many times it can be still very political, or, you know, religious or any of that sort. But I
Dave
think
Mustaine.
more than anything, I think it taps into how we as people express emotions,
Yeah,
express our you know, our thoughts, more. I think a little bit more clearly, or you know, exerting aggravation that we have throughout our daily lives. So there's a lot more of a personal and global connection in today's type of styles out there. I encourage, you know, more of this type of music to be out there. I love what Arch Enemy was doing
yeah.
with their albums, their latest
So
albums.
awesome, man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think the message of bringing people together is a lot more effective in
it's needed right now.
and
You
it's
know.
definitely needed. I think with such
Yeah,
a divisive sort of stance in this world where everybody now is absolutely separated,
yeah,
and we have to, for our health reasons, it's kind of it's kind of nice to see that we can still remain very connected, and encouraging each other. And right now the music scene is suffering really hard because there's no live shows happening. I'm in that industry. I work as an audio engineer, and I can't do shows. That was a big part of
Yeah,
my
dude.
income. So, having to readjust and seeing so much support from everybody out in the world and saying, okay, look, it doesn't matter where you come from, who you are, you're still part of this family, and we still support you, and we still treat you as one of us. And that's what I loved about being a metalhead. I think that's what really made it stand out from everything else. I can't. I mean, I love listening to country music, but I can't necessarily relate to the people in that community so much as I do with the metal
My
community.
headphones are messing up, Ken. I'm sorry. Something happened here. Did you say something about country music? Oh, dude.
We've been having a blast. I see
Yeah.
people go like, "What's rap? What's country?" This is
It
hilarious.
so that's an interesting thing too, because I don't like I typically I do not listen to any kind of rap or hip hop. I don't really listen to country either. I guess I'm somewhat I'd like to think of myself as open-minded with music as well, just like religion, but it's like one of those things where I love rock and roll and metal, but I do listen to 80s pop music. That's a non that's my guilty pleasure. I don't I'm not trying to hide that. Yeah. The Tiffany's, I think we're alone now, she started out in the mall singing in the malls.
Oh
And
God,
then Weird Al Yankovic, I think we're a clone now.
there you go.
Yeah, so
Oh
but
man,
no, this is interesting, very interesting stuff though, man, because I think being tolerant, even if being a metalhead, even if you have a good friend, that doesn't believe what you believe, I think we have to be okay with that. You know what I mean? Like Ken and I, you and I are very similar in beliefs. I might believe some things that you don't, and you might believe or advise some little tweaks to it. But I think everybody is their own individual too.
yeah, of
Even
course,
even Christians I meet, there's so many different sects of that, So it's like even those people, though, you have to understand that your person sitting to your right and left may not agree with every single thing. And I think we have to get to a point where we just say, I'm okay with that. you know,
yeah,
you don't have to be on my side of the fence necessarily to be my friend. As long as you're a decent person, I have only a few rules. Don't touch kids, don't hurt animals, and don't steal from me.
yeah.
Outside of
Don't be a
that,
shitty
I
person.
just be a decent person. Just be cool.
Yeah.
Remember your ABCs.
Uh,
Always be cool.
Yeah, we talked about the golden rule of recording, but there is also
Yes.
that golden rule of just being a decent person. And it's not, and people say it comes from like this Jesus narrative, but really it's a universal thing. I think you see it in every culture, if I'm not mistaken. Just treat others how you want to be treated. It's not just tied to one religion. That is a global thing, and a lot of the
Yeah.
stories that we see in religion actually share the same narrative among other religions as
They do.
well.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I think people, whatever they're believing in, they interpret maybe the end result as being different, but the story is still teaching the same principles. And these parables, I think, are what are where we get our sort of influence of morality. That's what people like to argue, but I think really what it comes down to is not just we're not I mean, religion can be a guideline for many things, but it's really more of how we've interacted with folks in a social level over the course of time and learn from our mistakes and then move forward. That's what progressive movement is, right? Moving forward. Right now, recently we've seen in the states sort of an acknowledgement towards something like, for example, transgender community, which was very much not a thing, in the US for a very long time. It was very much looked down upon, but now you're seeing that switch over, into a new light, which is encouraging. We want to see movement move forward, and that's what we're trying to do as a community all around the world. And metalheads, we take those people in. Okay, yeah, okay, you may be different, but that's why we love you, because you are the outsider. So come join us, be part of the legion of the metalheads, and we're going to, take the world by storm and not spread hate, but spread this sort of unifying message that we are all connected in some way, shape, or form. We call each other brothers and sisters, and it's not a cult, but a mentality, a philosophy of approaching life with an aggressive attitude, saying that we are going to dominate what we feel is our destiny, and take on life by the horns, quite literally.
Those horns, yeah.
And even like this symbol, right? You
Yeah.
you remember the story about how this symbol came to be, Jason?
I don't. I was always told in the past that this meant a goat head basically, and goat head was like a satanic symbol. I know the story, but I just don't remember it. This is what happens when you're over 40 years old. You don't remember shit. But
Well, this became popularized by Dio, right? It became popularized
Dio.
by
Okay.
Dio, and he was shown this symbol by his grandmother, which
Wow.
saying this keeps the devil away.
Oh, I like that.
This
Wow.
is what the symbol meant. And when he used that symbol, he used it in the sense of, singing to keep the devils away and keep the demons at
Yeah.
bay. But it became the symbol of metal as how we recognize horns up, right? And people, some say, they say, oh, it's the devil's horns, as to
Right. Right.
saying we represent the devil. But it's really the
Yeah.
opposite of that. It's to say we kick the devil out. And it's an interesting symbol that holds a lot of meaning, just by that alone,
Yeah.
which I love. Dio, God bless his soul. He's one of the
Dude.
best,
Yeah.
and
Iconic, man.
will be remembered forever. Um, so long as mumble rap doesn't take over the world.
Oh my god, dude, please don't tell me these things, man. This is horrible. Like, even the name, it's really called mumble rap,
Yeah,
like you
it's really
mumble,
called
like,
mumble rap.
it's like, dude, Ken, this is almost as bad as those YouTube videos that came out a while back where people were just whispering, you know?
Oh
I remember
yeah,
those people were I'm like, "Are you serious?" People were watching, and then they did the mannequins when you freeze, and, it's like, "Oh, that's what we need, a bunch of people not doing shit because we got too much of that already," you know? Anyway,
yeah,
so,
man.
that's me showing my age, some of this new stuff that comes out, it's like, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
But, religion, I think metal is a religion though too, Ken. I think that at the heart of it, yeah, we have all these underlying beliefs and culture and all that, and that's awesome. We respect that. But I think metal is almost kind of like a religion in itself, if you want to call it a cult or whatever. But there's a when you see a fellow metalhead, you immediately connect with that person. Like if I walk down the street and I see somebody wearing a Testament or an Arch Enemy T-shirt or a Monomarth or something like that, it's like you're one of me and I'm one of you. It's like immediate.
yeah, there is definitely that sense of community, right? And you could
It
call
is.
it a religion, you can call it a philosophy, but it is definitely an overarching umbrella of inclusion that, yeah, once you recognize one of your own, you
Yeah,
definitely you have some sort of, icebreaker right there, and you can,
yeah,
hit it off right from the get go.
yep.
And I think it's important to remember that that sort of element to the metal community that's not apparent in many other genres.
It's not,
It's
dude.
it's a
No,
very
it's not.
unique thing in this sort of community. So, guys, if you guys have any questions, we'd love to hear. What are your thoughts about, what are some things you want to see moving forward? Do you like this kind of content? Certainly for us, me and Jason, we think this is a very interesting, open-ended conversation where we can kind of go
It's
long-term
fun.
discussion
Yeah,
about what's going on in the world, what's going on with the community. How do we view, and what does the world, what's the lens of how we should move forward in life, and in this sort of path. I'm mumbling over my own
Well,
words.
no, no, I think what you we Ken and I talked earlier, guys. So if you this is kind of like a kind of off the wall video here that we're doing today, but we feel it's important and we want to talk about it. And we Metal Mastermind is all about helping you in aspect of being a heavy metal musician and
Right.
songwriter and performer and all that stuff. And that's from giving tips in the studio to practice tips, but it's also to things like we talked about last week about keeping your body and mind healthy, and to things
Yeah,
like just lifestyle. Like this is kind of a lifestyle video here, but if you guys have some specific things that you would like for us to cover, we have a long list of things. The list goes on, but if you guys have something specific, uh, please comment below and tell us. Please let us
absolutely.
know that. You know what I mean,
Um,
so that we can put it out there for you.
And don't forget, guys, if you're new to this channel, we have a free guide for those who are interested in developing their own music studio. It's called The Quick Guide to the Ultimate Home Recording Studio. It was written by me and Jason. It's a quick read. It's 16 pages, but it's like nice big, and there's pictures and stuff like that, so it's easy to
We
get
love
through.
pictures.
Love pictures too, man. And
Yeah,
it's just chock full of just information that you need to know how to
yeah.
get your own studio up and running. So if you're interested in something like that, go to metalmastermind.com/join and sign up for that email list so that you get,
And it's right there in the
yeah,
comments
you
too.
get it immediately. And then you're also subscribed to our email list to get notified of any updates and new episodes that are coming out. We send reminders so that we are, we get to hang out with everybody. We love this sort of back and forth commentary that we get during our live sessions. We feel like it's a lot more open ended. And it can go any which way, which makes it exciting. So, if you choose to support our channel, just give a like, a thumbs up, and subscribe and ring the bell so that you are notified of new videos. And we're coming out with another video this Friday.
This Friday, yes.
Yes, of our it's a short, more condensed version of our live session of the golden rule of recording. It's got a really
Yeah.
great focused bit of information on that application of recording.
Yeah, you guys will enjoy that too. So it should release Friday at noon. I think that's when we're releasing the videos. And this again, the Friday video is not a live video. That's just a regular YouTube video. So just you should get the notification when it pops out. As long as you're on our YouTube channel and you've subscribed, and then there's a little bell icon. I know everybody talks about the bell. It's like ACDC's Hell's Bells or Metallica's For Whom the Bells Toll, right? But had to do the puns. But there's a little notification bar where you can get all of our notifications. So when we release something, you'll get an email, or you'll get like a pop-up, or whatever. YouTube will notify you. So
Yeah.
that will be out. I will also send an email out that day too when it's released. We'll send an email out. So that's a good way for us to communicate, because sometimes the social media platforms, they kind of push everything down. There's so much info out there, but when you sign up, which that link is in the guide there, I'm sorry, the guide is in the link. I'm screwing up, dude. I haven't even had any beer yet today.
Dude.
The link to the guide is in the comments there. So
Yeah.
just go click on that.
Yeah, and don't forget, guys, just let us know your thoughts about what kind of content you'd like to see. We're very interested in knowing what
Please
it
do.
is
Yeah.
that you want to see on this channel. If you've liked what you've seen so far, that's great. We'll continue to do
Yeah.
that. And if you have any suggestions moving forward, please let us know.
Awesome.
Jason, do you have anything else you'd like to say?
No, just I'm reading Acoustic's comment here. Ken, you and I, we always hang out for a little bit after the live is up. So Acoustic, free third-party plugins that are good and not junk. That's
That's a great topic.
wow.
That's
Yeah,
a
that's
great
a really
topic.
good topic. So that's
I
something
got a
Ken and
lot
I
to
will
say
discuss.
about that one. So yeah, sure. We could definitely organize something of that sort down the road.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
Well, guys, this has been Metal Mastermind. Thank you for joining, and we will see you next time. Horns up.
Keep the horns up.